topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. And my team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture and inspirational leadership activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, alisecortez.com. Before we get into today's program, I am thrilled to announce that registration has been open for a fabulous new conference for women, which I'll serve as the MC. It's called Thrive in 25, and it's a jam-packed few days in Chicago, June 25th through the 28th, 2025. And it's designed to develop women as whole selves, from bolstering your mindset to your financial acumen to leadership to incorporating nature and art into your life to raise consciousness and much more. You can visit Thrive in 25 for information and to register. Use my promo code of GUSTO, all caps, to gain access to the free books and programs I'll be gifting registrants as well. See you there. Now, today's program has with us Zach Mercurio, a researcher, leadership development facilitator, speaker, specializing in purposeful leadership, mattering, and meaningful work. He is the author of The Power of Mattering, How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance, which we'll be talking about today. He joins us from Fort Collins, Colorado. Zach, welcome back, I think a third time, to Working on Purpose.
Thanks, Alise. It's good to see you.
You're right. I just really appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. You know, I'm a huge fan, of course. I've been following you since at least 2017 when your first book came out. So I'm in for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have at least one fan in your corner, Zach. You know that.
Hey, that's all I need.
Okay. Well, actually, we have a lot of work to do. And I want to start with this notion that you have in your book, which I think is a good place for us to start, is you talk about how we can't really have healthy organizations with unhealthy people in them. So let's start there, the idea of unhealthy organizations.
Well, an organization is simply comprised of individual human beings who organize. So the health of an organization is really determined by the health of its individuals. A lot of the way that we've structured organizations and thought about organizations and led organizations since the Industrial Revolution has obsessively focused on lagging indicators, productivity, performance, profit. All of those are lagging indicators. There is no performance metric that is not mediated through a human being. And how would you want that human being to feel, to produce and perform? Most people would say we want them to feel motivated. We want them to feel energized. We want them to feel that the work matters. We want them to feel that they matter. And when you start thinking like that, you'll realize that the leading indicator for every lagging indicator we want is human energy. And so I think that the time is now for leaders to begin to think about how they're thinking about their organizations in terms of human energy. Are you regenerating the human energy needed to accomplish all the things you say you want to accomplish? And the answer in many of our organizations right now is no.
I tend very much to agree, of course, because we're doing some similar kind of work. And I really like how you really situate, the importance for leaders or anyone who influences anyone, of course, you say, filling people's fundamental need for significance is an imperative. And so when I think about, like I've had other people on the podcast that have talked about the experience of having really, let's just say, terrible leaders that had no idea of the negative impact and shrapnel that they were cascading through their organizations and through their people. On the other side of that, the opportunity to really lift lives, and I love the word significance, to be able to fuel their need for significance. So if you could say a bit more about, that particular need and why is it so important for leaders to impact that?
Every single person that you lead was born searching for significance. It's a biological fact. The first thing you did as a human being was you reached your arms out for someone to care for you. In fact, scientists find that we have a reflex to grasp onto somebody, a caretaker, before we have a reflex to eat food.
Wow.
Nobody would be here listening to this show right now if we all did not matter enough to someone else to keep us alive. Now, as we grow up and grow into adulthood and go to work, that instinct, just like the instinct to eat or the instinct to sleep, does not go away because we clock in somewhere. We like to conveniently think that it does, but it does not. It turns into the fundamental need to feel seen, heard, valued, and needed by those around us. And so that need for significance, it is first and foremost a survival instinct. Someone once said to me, Zach, this is kind of the soft, touchy-feely stuff. And I responded, it's just about as touchy-feely as feeding someone in front of you who's hungry. It is a prerequisite. And for leaders, it's essential because if you want anything to matter to someone, they first have to believe that they matter. Think about the last time you felt energized to do something when you felt unimportant. If you want someone's voice, if you want someone to share their voice, they first have to believe their voice is significant. If you want your team members to use their strengths, they first have to believe they have them. If you want your team members to contribute, they first have to believe they're worthy of contributing. And that's why this fundamental need is, I think, the prerequisite. I don't think there's anything more important for a leader than showing people how they matter. If you're a leader, anytime you hear the word fundamental human need, you should be thinking, do I have that fundamental skill?
My gosh.
A leader's craft is people.
Yeah.
Leaders influence people. That's why I say anyone who influences anybody. So the best leaders hone their craft. They practice the fundamentals of being human. The fundamental need that all humans have is to matter, to feel significant.
All right, two things to that, Zach. One, I need you to tell the story about the woman who every day cleaned the windows and then the sprinklers came on. So tell that story. And then the other thing I wanted to say is what I appreciate about the work that you do and that I get to do as well is that when we do teach people to be able to use these kinds of skills, what happens is all of their relationships across their whole entire life as individuals improve radically. So whoever they're connected to, whoever their loved one is at home, if they have children, if they have pets, all of those relationships get better immediately too. I love it when I occasionally get an email from somebody's spouse saying thank you for what you're doing, right? Isn't it so beautiful, right? And so lifting lives by being able to help develop and fortify these skills in leaders, it's such beautiful work to get to do.
And I'm an optimist. I don't believe that any leader wakes up and is like, I would like to be an uncaring leader today.
Right.
I think we have many people in leadership positions who aren't trained with the human skills. And what's hopeful about all this is that we can relearn these skills to see, hear, value one another. And you're right, it makes us better people. But that's what being a leader is. When I ask people, thousands of people, think about the most important, impactful leader in your life. They do not talk about quarterly earnings reports, product launches, or achievements. They talk about feeling seen, heard, and valued in everyday interactions. That's why, I often say your next great leadership act is your next interaction. And I think uncaring leaders happen because they're untrained. And I want to give you an example of what happens when a leader creates that environment. And I'll share the story of that woman, the window washer. So just as mattering is a fundamental need, when that instinct is not met, our minds and our bodies react accordingly. Typically what happens is we either withdraw, also known as quiet quitting, silencing, withholding, or we act out in desperation. Complaining, blaming, gossiping, other so-called toxic behaviors are often cries for significance, reaching out for significance. And a perfect example of this is I was asked to work with a group of maintenance workers. One of their roles was to clean the windows of this bottom floor of this industrial complex in the summer. And this woman had her team go in every morning, and she was leading the team and had them do it. Now, the first week on the job, she noticed very soon that the reason she was going in there every day with her team was because the sprinkler heads on that system were aimed wrong. So at 3 p.m. every afternoon, the sprinkler system blasted on and blasted all the windows, left all of these avoidable water splotches. And this is why the client wanted them to come in every morning during the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really excited. I mean, she came up to her supervisor and she said, I have an idea. What if we aimed the sprinklers differently? What if we fixed the sprinklers? That would completely save time and change the morale in the team. And the supervisor just said, that's the sprinkler people's problem. It's not our problem. I need you to just do your job. That was 5 years prior to me being called in because, quote unquote, this team was unmotivated.
Mm-hmm.
This was not an unmotivated team. This was a team that experienced what psychologists call anti-mattering. What happened is when she got shut down, guess who she told? She told her team. Mm-hmm. Guess what they did? They protected themselves. They said, well, what we do, what we say is not going to matter here, so why am I going to bother? It resulted in the most insidious force in an organization, which is learned helplessness. I've been conditioned to believe that I and what I do and what I say won't, can't, and never will matter. And learned helplessness is contagious in an organization. And that's the consequence. Just as mattering is created in moments, anti-mattering is created in moments. That supervisor probably doesn't even know that that one moment cascaded into the quote unquote motivation and turnover issues on their team.
I never tire of you telling that story. I think it's just so powerful, and it really lays out just how insidious this is and just how it can live and just like catch fire in an organization. So you mentioned, that mattering happens in small, repeatable interactions. And of course, for you, your model is that's through helping people to feel noticed, affirmed, and needed. we're going to go into more detail into those. But what I want to situate now, before we go into the break, is I want our listeners and viewers to understand really the science behind what you've created here, this idea of mattering, anti-mattering significance, the ways that you can actually start to address this, because otherwise people feel like, oh, that's so soft. I don't have those kinds of soft skills. Of course, we mean human skills. And so if you could just say a little bit about noticing, affirming, and needing.
Yes. So this is based on 40 years of research. The concept of mattering has been around for 40 years. And psychologists find that we feel that we matter when there are two things going on, when we feel valued, and then when we know exactly how we add value. Yeah. One of the things I think that's really important before we get into the noticed, affirmed, and needed model is to understand that typically we think that people must be valued once they add value. That's the typical performance, merit-based environment in which we've lived for the past 50 years. But psychologically, people have to feel valued to add value, right? You can't expect someone to care until they feel cared for. Yeah. And so researchers have found that mattering results from three things: when we're paid attention to, when we are shown that we are important, and when we feel essential, when someone needs us. And so what we did is we went and interviewed hundreds of people, and we worked in many different organizations, from the US Army to large banks. And we asked people, when you feel that you matter here to a leader, what is happening? And there are three behaviors that consistently came about: the behaviors of being seen and heard, noticed; the behaviors of being shown how your unique gifts make a unique difference, specifically affirmed; and being told and shown exactly how you and what you do is relied on, needed. Those noticed, affirmed, and needed model builds off of what we know creates mattering from 40 years of research. But we've also tested this with thousands of employees in 22 plus industries. And when we ask them what your leader does, they all talk about small interactions in which someone pays attention to them, someone thanks them, shows them gratitude, and someone shows them how they're needed. And yes, they're all skills we can learn.
It makes me happy just hearing that. And of course, I'm completely in alignment with you on that. And that's what we're out to. That's why we're on the planet, right, Zach? I know that your purpose is to help people feel significant. And I love that that's what you stand for. Let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Zach Mercurio, a researcher, leadership development facilitator, and speaker specializing in purposeful leadership, mattering, and meaningful work. We've been talking about a few of his concepts from his latest book, The Power of Mattering. After the break, we're going to learn about 5 sources of insignificance to get us started. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As I, too, am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world, I keep researching and writing my own books. So my last one came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand today's workforce wants and needs, and then offer 22 best practices to equip them to provide that to them through their culture and leadership. You can learn about my books at my personal site, alisecortez.com, or on Amazon. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Dr. Zach Mercurio. He's the author of The Power of Mattering, How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance. So before we get into those 5 practices of insignificance, one thing I did want to share with listeners and viewers that I thought was a pretty interesting way of thinking about how work has evolved over years is what you talk about as, if I'm saying this person's name wrong, Manoush Shafiq, is that right? Mm-hmm. Former president of Colombia, was talking about how we're really in a relationship economy. She said in the past, she or he?
She.
She said in the past, jobs were about muscles. And then they were about brains. And now in the future, they'll be about the heart. I think that's really, really fascinating, especially when you consider how we are swaddled in AI and robotics and artificial intelligence, everything else. So that we are now moving to a place where work will be characterized by the heart.
Yes, and it's a natural evolution. I mean, all work was purposeful, right? Work was born as an act of community. If my neighbor did not have shoes, I was a shoemaker. If my community needed food, I grew food. What happened is that the shoemaker got put in a factory and said, hey, I'll give you this amount of money if you can tolerate just putting the sole on the shoe and not seeing the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's where work as exchange happened. Well, and then we got into machinery and the industrial age. And then we found ways to automate everything and got into the information age and connect everything. And now what's happening is that AI is eclipsing our operational and technical abilities. And all we're going to have left as human beings is the ability to make the person in front of us feel seen, heard, valued, and needed. As of now, AI cannot mirror neurons. It cannot produce oxytocin. It cannot produce dopamine in interactions. So the most coveted skill for a leader is going to be to develop relationships in which people feel understood.
Mm.
And that's why I really agree with that sentiment that we're moving from the information age into the relationship age, where we're almost returning back to work as an act of community and relating to one another and contributing to one another. And that's why the mattering work fits so perfectly, because mattering happens when we feel valued by the community around us and when we know exactly how we add value to their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to that end, Zach, I mean, I don't remember when this happened, but we started using the tagline at Gusto now of "We're doubling down on humanity in the age of technology." So, same,
And
very similar thing.
There's been some surveys from executives that have said recently, in the age of AI, that relational skills, I mean, I think 70% in a recent survey, and I'll send it to you, said that relational skills would be more important to the future of their organization than technical ability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And why is that, right? Well, it's also because, as people have more options of where, when, and how to earn a living through gig work, or as we see educational attainment and literacy rates going up, people have more choice. As people have more choice, they're able to discern where and when they want to spend their time.
Right.
And more people are discerning where they want to spend their time based on how they feel.
Mm.
So organizations that don't invest in this will also not have a labor force, I reckon, in 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, they're the easiest to displace, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about those 5 sources of insignificance. The reason I like to do this, Zach, I mean, some of this is like the other side of what you've been talking about, but it helps our listeners and viewers, as you know, to be able to start to recognize what this stuff looks like. So the first one, of course, is being unseen. What's it like? Paint the picture for us. What's it like to feel unseen?
I'll give an example from one of my studies, the first studies I've done, and I've talked to you about this many times, but around university cleaners. And I'll give you a very odd example that shows you the opposite of being unseen. But we asked a janitor to tell us about the most meaningful part of her job. And she was a janitor at a sports stadium. And at a football game, she said that between quarters, someone had thrown up in the bathroom entrance. And she started telling me this. She said she went to clean it. And as she was cleaning it, a line formed. And she said she put her mop in her bucket after she was done, and she walked past. And as she was walking past, people in that line started thanking her. And she said that was the most meaningful part of my career, because it was the most amount of people who ever saw me. So the what made the work meaningful for her was not this unpleasant task. It was being seen while doing it.
Yeah.
So being seen is literally being acknowledged. Being unseen is being invisible. It's being forgotten. It's when you were absent for a meeting last week and nobody said they missed you. It's having someone not remember that your parent was in the hospital and that you're struggling with your energy levels, so they pile on more projects to you. It's about you do something every day or it's about being an unsung hero. No organization should have unsung heroes, when you think about it. So that's being seen, and to be seen is to be real as human beings. Like, we know that we're real, that what we're doing matters. And that janitor said that when she saw all those people seeing her, actually looking at her, she said, oh, I can keep doing this. I really can. Yeah. And that's the motivational force of being seen.
I've got to imagine a distant, cousin to that is, of course, the idea of being unheard.
Yes, being unheard is what happened with that window washer.
Yes, absolutely.
When we share our voice, we're sharing part of ourselves. So when somebody doesn't listen to our voice, they're not listening to us.
Yep.
And that voice, that inner experience, when that's not able to be invited out, we feel unheard. And so that manifests in environments where people can't speak up because they're afraid. They're in environments where they get punished for making mistakes, where their reputation is tarnished if they disagree. And silence in an organization is one of the biggest indicators of an organization that fosters anti-mattering.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it's just there was a lot of activity today on LinkedIn about cultures of lacking psychological safety. Pretty interesting that's kind of an interesting topic on a Tuesday.
Can I add one little
Yeah,
component?
please.
Psychological safety is a topic that's gotten a lot of popularity, but all psychological safety is childhood attachment in the workplace. And
Yeah.
I know this is odd for me to go here,
No.
but the mattering work was born out of attachment. So, for example, when you feel that you matter to a parent, when you're a child, you're much more likely to be able to go out, take risks, experiment, and learn
Mhm.
because you know you already matter. You can't screw up enough to not matter to somebody.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things that when I see, knowing the research on attachment, when I go to someone's house and I see kids being loud in front of their parents without fear, I know
Mhm.
there's secure attachment there.
Yeah. I got you.
And so psychological safety is really just adult attachment. It's knowing that I have a secure base, knowing that someone has my back so I can go out, take risks, experiment, and learn. But
Mm.
we can't call it adult attachment because nobody would buy the books, right?
Uh,
But that's all it is. And that's why I just want to create this thread for your listeners, because it's very important to understand that these needs, the need to matter, may be called different things. I call it mattering in disguise, but it all goes back to that child who's reaching out and grasping for significance.
I really love that you did that. That I didn't make that connection before. I think that's very powerful. In fact, what's been going through my mind through this conversation, Zach, is we do this work really well together to help develop leaders' capacity to be able to foster these skills to be able to help people see how they matter. And now what I think happens is we live in safer societies. We live in places where maybe there's less crime, where people aren't hurting each other as much, physically, emotionally, etc. And that's the kind of impact that I want to be part of. And that when we help our leaders understand just the ripple effect of this, please, it's really worth investing and working on developing this stuff. You can do this.
Yeah, and I'm actually not trying to convince anybody anymore to invest in it. I'm essentially saying that you can't not invest in this anymore.
Yeah, I
I mean, there's no
completely
you
with you.
almost every human behavioral problem is the result of unmet needs.
Mm.
It
Whew.
even and a lot of mental health and as you know, a lot of mental health professionals will tell you that most mental health struggles are the result of unmet needs.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that in works, and we've talked about some of these sources, right? Being unseen, being unheard. The other one is being unvalued.
Yep.
So not knowing how your gifts make a difference, not having anybody say thank you. I think there was a survey that said 60% of people have never had a boss that truly appreciates them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Feeling unvalued, feeling forgotten is another source. This is feeling, and this is interesting because this is, for example, one woman who went on maternity leave said that one moment uh, caused her to question her whole sense of self-worth. And that was when she was going on maternity leave and her boss said, "Don't worry, everything will be fine without you."
Yeah. Mm.
And it was well-intentioned,
Yeah.
but it's really saying, "Hey, you don't matter that much here."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
being forgotten. And then the final one is feeling dispensable. When people feel replaceable, they'll act replaceable. But feeling that you and your efforts just don't matter, aren't needed.
Yeah, and we can easily replace you. I mean, that language has been in the workplace for a long time, right? We can easily replace you with somebody who actually wants to work for us. Can
And
you?
isn't what's so interesting is that the want to work for you comes when the person feels needed.
Right, right. I know. I get all this. It's amazing. Okay, so let's talk here. Let's talk first a little bit about noticing it. Really help our listeners and viewers start to get into the idea of how can they actually start to fold this practice into themselves. So help us gain some access to behaviors that they can use for noticing.
Well, one of the things that's important to know about all of these practices is that someone once said to me, "Zach, isn't this common sense?" We're like, "Why do you have a job?"
Yeah,
Uh, and unfortunately, it's not common practice,
yeah.
right? There was a study by Work Human in 2024 that found that 30% of people feel invisible in work.
Mm-hmm.
25% of those people, a quarter of people said they felt, quote unquote, flat out ignored.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, Zach, I know my team. But there's a difference between knowing somebody and noticing them. You can know your best friend, but not notice that they're struggling. You can know your team, but not notice that one of them is feeling left out of discussions, or maybe their energy level is a little bit different that day, or they've been repeatedly struggling on a project. So noticing has two parts. It's seeing somebody and it's hearing them. Noticing is paying attention to the details, the ebbs, the flows of someone's life, and then offering an action to show them that they're thought about. A great example of this is I got to work with a distribution center, and there was one manager for one team that was highly engaged when all of the other teams in the center were disengaged. And we went to this team, and I was just very curious because I wanted to know what was going on here in this outlier. I love outliers. And I asked the team, I said, what's going on here? And they all said some version of, oh, it's our leader. She just gets us. We'd do anything for her. And so I went to her and I said, what do you do? And she goes, Zach, 3 years ago, I realized that I was having trouble keeping track of my team members, the details of their lives. And so I started this notebook. Now she has like 10 of them. Yeah. Right. And she writes down her team members' names on Fridays. And then she writes down one thing she heard them talk about, complain about, a piece of equipment they were struggling with, a meeting they were nervous about, a kid who was starting a new sport. And on Monday, she said, I just start my week by looking at that list and scheduling in my mind a 3-minute micro check-in with each of them. And I'll say to them, I remember last week you were nervous about that meeting. How was it? How did it go? And she looked at me in this interview and she said, Zach, I realized there is magic in being remembered.
Yeah.
But what I love about what she did is it's a practice.
Yes. Right.
Right. That practice of noting was a way to pay attention. And that captures the essence of this noticing practice, paying attention, asking good questions, remembering the details of people's lives, authentically checking in on how they're doing. And when they share with you, making sure they feel heard.
Yeah. Yeah. You're reminding me, Zach, a few years ago, I was doing some work with a hospice organization on the East Coast. It was an engagement sort of survey kind of work and consulting. And what we discovered is there was so much disengagement on the front lines because there were people that would say, gosh, I just want to, as I'm walking down the hall, when the CEO passes, I just want them to say hello or even just smile at me. But instead they just keep walking like I don't exist, right? I'm invisible. Yeah. Just what you're talking about. It's so simple. Like, I know you're busy and you're trying to get, you're prepping for the next meeting and such, but notice the people that are walking past you. You matter to those people. They would love to have a smile from you, an acknowledgement, a hello from you.
Yes. Hurry and care cannot coexist.
Yeah.
You cannot. You can care about your people from afar, but there's a difference between caring about people and caring for them.
Yes.
And I think this is missed. To care for anything, you have to understand it. And understanding takes time and it takes attention. And one of the things that is especially important to the noticing practice is retraining our minds to pay attention to people. Yeah. And that tool of noting, of having some tool, having some practice to turn this common sense idea into common practice is incredibly important.
Oh, I want to share a story that I just saw on Facebook, but let's grab our last break before I do that. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Dr. Zach Mercurio. I'm a researcher, leadership development facilitator, and a speaker specializing in purposeful leadership, mattering, and meaningful work. We've been getting into the more of the details of his mattering model and the various practices that you can start to learn to fold in. After the break, we're going to move on to the next practice, which is affirming. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break that my book came out, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a very simple 3-page assessment that will tell you the extent to which your practices are meeting the needs of today's discerning workforce. You can find it at my website, gusto-now.com. If you're just now joining us, my guest is Zach Mercurio. He's the author of The Power of Mattering, How Leaders Can Create a Culture of Significance. So the story I wanted to share with you, based on the idea of noticing, paying attention to your people. I just saw this on Facebook today, and it's pretty powerful. The story is that a woman, a manager, had been noticing one of her employees was really starting to fall down on the job. She was coming in late and just not really focusing much. And so she gave her 3 strikes, and then she fired her. And then she overheard some of the other employees talking about this employee and saying, "Gosh, did you know, her son is dealing with some kind of major illness. She's lost her apartment. She's sleeping in her car." And she realized, oh my gosh, I was saying, she's not doing all these things, but I wasn't really noticing what was going on with her. And so I went to go look for her. She'd been on the street. She'd been getting, food given to her on the streets. And I went looking for her in various places. And people would say, "Oh, she was here 2 days ago, but I don't know where she is now." But ultimately, she does catch up with her, and she finds her and her young son sleeping in the car on the street. And she comes up and knocks on the window, and the woman is obviously startled, and she's wondering why she's there. But the woman says, "I'm here to give you your job back. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what you were dealing with." And she did. She brought her back. But talk about the power of, wow, what if you had noticed? If you had simply inquired, what's going on? Why is it that you're coming in late each day? Was there something happening at home? How can I help? Right. So this noticing stuff is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Most people do not need to be fixed or punished. They need to be understood.
Right. Right.
And that is such a powerful example of that.
Mm-hmm.
Before you evaluate, are you understanding?
Yeah. 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 So the affirming piece, let's talk about this. One of the things I'll say, definitely, I don't know if you knew this or not, but when I got divorced in 2016, I took a job at another company for a while. And what I really realized, they're a great company, really fantastic organization. I love their culture. I love their work, but I definitely was not at all using all of my talents. People didn't know what my talents were. People had no idea what I could do. And it's definitely part of the reason I didn't stay.
Absolutely. So a lot of organizations have appreciation or recognition programs, but it's very important for leaders to understand the difference between appreciation, recognition, and affirmation.
Yeah.
Because what you're talking about is an affirmation gap.
Yeah.
Because appreciation is showing general gratitude for who someone is. Recognition is showing general gratitude for what someone does. But affirmation is showing people how their uniqueness makes a unique difference. Yeah. It's specific. A program can't affirm somebody. Right? A pay or perks cannot affirm somebody. Right. People affirm people. And there are 2 sides of affirmation. One is showing people their uniqueness, and 2 is showing people how they make a unique difference.
Yeah.
And there are 4 gifts everybody gives us every day. And I use the word gifts because it's things people freely give us. They give us their strength, what they love to do and what they're good at. They give us their purpose, their impact that they make. They give us their perspective, how only they see the world, and they give us their wisdom, what only they can teach us because only they have lived their life and had their career. And great leaders tend to illuminate in others what they don't see in themselves and can name, here is the difference that you make and how you make it. One of the great ways to do that is that if you're going to say thank you to somebody, instead of just saying, "Hey, thanks, good job," at the same time every day, show someone the difference they make and exactly how they make it. Say, "I see these, here's the perspective you offered, and here's why it's valuable. Here are your strengths I saw. Here's your impact that I saw. Here's the wisdom that I felt and heard." And just that can go an incredibly long way.
Yeah. One of the things I like to say when I'm working with leaders to help develop them, especially around this idea of affirmation, is when you can talk with somebody in a way and help them see how much they have uniquely made a difference, and you move them to tears, you've done it really well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somebody said, "Oh, you want me to make people cry?" I said, "I didn't say make people cry. I said I want you to ideally move toward being able to
Yeah.
move them to tears. Big difference."
That reminds me, I like to say that affirming leaders give people the indisputable evidence of their significance. I
Oh,
work,
that's gorgeous.
so someone can't argue with it. And that's where you get that emotion. One of the leaders at the National Park Service that I worked with, he worked in facilities management, and he managed a facilities team in a very remote, difficult to manage area of the national parks. And he had some of the highest morale in the whole Park Service. And so we wanted to understand what was going on. I told you I love the outliers. And one of the things he told me is he had a practice on Fridays where he would go around the park during the week and he'd take pictures of visitors walking over a bridge that was repaired there was a shorter line for a bathroom because one of them was fixed and opened. He'd take a picture, and he would have a practice on Friday. He would just send his team an email message with all of these pictures in it. And all he wrote is, "Look what you did." That's it. It was the indisputable evidence. Oh, like I matter. And this is the difference between organizations that say they have a purpose
Yeah.
and organizations that show people every day how they deliver that purpose.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Okay, we're coming close to the end of the show, and I want to make sure and get at least a couple more things out of you. So let's talk about the last arm of it, and that's needing.
Yeah. In 1913, French agricultural engineer, his name was Max Ringelmann, he did this study, and he had individual students pull on a rope as hard as they could, and he attached this rope to a dynamometer. It's a device that measures force, so like how hard they're pulling on the rope. And then he put these individual students into groups, and he had the groups pull on the ropes as hard as they could, and he measured the force readings, and he added them up. And who do you think exerted the most total force? Individuals or groups? Most people would say, oh, it was obviously the groups. It was the individuals every single time. Why? Because they knew that they and their effort was indispensable. When we feel that we matter, we act like we matter. The flip side is true. When we feel replaceable, as I mentioned earlier, we will act replaceable.
Yeah.
So we are born interdependent. Interdependent. People don't like this word dependence, but interdependent means needed by others. That's the translation. So if you use that word and you believe that we're interdependent, you know that we're needed by others. And we are wired to feel needed. So, when we ask people, who is a leader in your life that's helped you feel that you matter, they frequently mention, some version of 5 words that I like to say all the time. If it wasn't for you.
Yeah.
That their leader or someone in their life said, hey, I just want to let you know, if it wasn't for you, this wouldn't be possible. And this works in our personal lives too. Imagine that feedback you get. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have this job. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have moved here. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have gotten through this week. And, I believe that there is no more powerful feeling as a human being than knowing that just one person relies on your presence.
Yeah, it's huge. It's really huge. Okay, so there's 2 things I want to do before we have to conclude, and that is, first, if you could just say a bit about, now that we've been really situating, I think everybody that's been listening and hearing this would say that, all right, I get the importance of this, but how do I scale it and create a culture of significance? So I know that you've got a whole chapter devoted to that.
Yeah.
Can you just, kind of talk us through briefly what that would look like?
Yes. One is you have to foster the motivation to do it. And really, you can't just say, hey, we're doing some mattering stuff now. Everybody needs to tell people how they matter. Or, hey, we're going to start focusing on collaboration, right? That's like telling someone who wants to eat better, hey, go search how to eat better. They get overwhelmed and they don't know where to go. Yeah. We have to make it real for people. Yeah. And one of the ways you can make it real is to have them have your leaders think about the time in their life when they most believe they matter to someone else, and have them share what that person was doing. And then your charge is to say, we're going to do that for the people that we serve. And that gives people a real emotional anchor. The second is make sure you're developing the right skills. So make sure you're naming and developing the right skills, and measure those skills, right? Have some way for leaders to self-assess, and then have some way for their teams to assess them on behaviors. One of the mistakes I think we make is we assess people on emotional ideas like engagement or satisfaction. When you do those things, they're important, but they're lagging indicators. When you measure engagement, you're measuring how someone felt when they took a survey.
Yeah.
When you measure the behaviors your leader is enacting to help you feel seen, you're measuring something that can be changed. It's the leading indicator.
Yes.
So measure behaviors, measure skills. And then finally, I would say, make sure that you're scanning your environment and making these things possible. If you run a distribution center, you cannot tell people, your leaders, to go care for people if they are managing people with scan guns with GPS trackers that track every hour of their day. Your environment does not make it possible to care.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is scan your environment and make sure your environment makes it possible that people can do these behaviors. And once you start doing this, and once you start measuring it, you'll quickly see that people start having better conversations. The conversation doesn't become, how can we get people to produce more? How can we get people to be more engaged? The conversation among leaders becomes, who do we need to see more? Who do we need to notice more? Who's maybe unheard? Who do we need to affirm more? Who do we need to show that they're needed so that they can get the numbers up?
Oh, okay. So I'd like to maybe close with this. I love this, and have you respond to this, Zach. You talk about, there's a Navajo proverb that you open the chapter with, and it says that wisdom reminds us that our assumption drives our actions. And too often we underestimate how much people feel unvalued, how much they feel unseen and unheard, and how lonely they are. The result is that we can overlook the practices and actions that can alleviate these feelings. Here's a good rule for every single leader. Always assume the people around you feel unseen, undervalued, and lonely, and act accordingly. Would you comment on that, and that'll be our close?
Yeah. The Navajo proverb is a proverb on hospitality. And it says, always assume your guest is tired, cold, and hungry, and act accordingly. Think about the service that you would provide if you assumed that. Imagine what your next interaction would look like. If you assumed that that person felt lonely, they felt unseen, they felt unheard, you would show up much differently. And I think that's the impetus, right? We have an underestimation bias as leaders, as people. We tend to think that not too many people want to talk to us. We tend to think that a simple thank you note won't mean much. But in study after study, we underestimate our impact. And so we don't act. But now is the time we need to act. More people than ever feel unseen. More people than ever feel unheard. More people than ever feel lonely. And the driving force of that is that they don't feel like they matter. We're facing a mattering deficit. And the solution resides in your next interaction.
What a beautiful way to finish, Zach. You are a gift to the planet. I'm grateful to know you, to learn from you, to be inspired by you. Thank you for coming back on Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Alise.
Always, listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about Zach Mercurio, the work that he does facilitating leadership and culture development, and his latest book, The Power of Mattering. So start by going to one of his sites. It's powerofmattering.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, we were on with Howard Lewis talking about his offline philosophy and his book, Leave Your Phone at the Door. It was a delightfully mischievous conversation about how we can all benefit by embracing serendipity, randomness, and the joy available in the everyday. Next week, we'll be on the air with Christopher Wong Michelson and Jennifer Tosti-Karas talking about their new book, The Meaning and Purpose of Work, an interdisciplinary framework for considering what work is for. It promises to be a fascinating and inspiring conversation. See you there. And remember, work is one of the best adventures and means of realizing our potential and making the impact we crave, and can give us the opportunity to do business in a way that betters the world. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.